fear has been really muchly the province of another sort of module, or part of the what used to be called the limbic system. Lloyd mentioned earlier, you know, we had this old idea of the Turon brain. Everybody thought that was really cool. It kind of made evolutionary sense. Well, it's not that simple anymore. In fact, the orbital frontal cortex is in some ways part of the limbic system, but it's part of the cortex. Well, the so-called amygdala, which really means almond in Latin, because some neuroanatomists about 100 years ago thought that it looked like an almond, called it as such. And its neighbor, the hippocampus, looked like a seahorse, so that's why it's called hippocampus. These are part of the so-called, what used to be regarded as the limbic system, but they're not that emotionally connected. Certainly, well, I don't mean emotionally connected, but rather doing the same things. The amygdala is really kind of like the fear center. You knock out the amygdala and dramatic changes take place with regard to what you will fear and what you'll emotionally connect to. Whereas the hippocampus, in many ways, lays down new memory, as we'll talk about. H.M. was probably, along with Phineas Gage, one of the most celebrated figures in neuroscience. He incurred a head injury at age 9 via a bicycle accident. He was riding his bike in Connecticut and got hit, and then for the next 20 years had seizures, terrible seizures. So by his late 20s, his parents said, hey, you know, we got to do something. You know, this guy's not very functional. He's in his late 20s. We got to do something. So his parents took him to a neurosurgeon by the name of Scoville, who said, okay, you know what we ought to do? Let's take out that area that's overactivated, having the seizures. So he had bilateral hippocampal removal, 1954. To his death, in December 2008, he thought that Eisenhower was the president. In fact, every day was a new day for Henry Molson. In neuroscience, we knew him as H.M. But he could form emotional memories. He just didn't know who you were. So various neuropsychologists, Brenda Milner, for example, would come down and do all these incredible studies with him, hundreds of studies. And every day he met Brenda and others, he would say, oh, how are you? It's nice to meet you, as if he's meeting them for the first time. However, if he had an emotional reaction to them, like say Brenda brought somebody and they squeezed his hand really badly or slapped him or hit him, the next day she'd bring him along and he didn't know who that person was. He'd kind of look at them, but he'd have this emotional reaction to them. His hippocampus was removed, but he still had that emotional affect, emotional memory. And that told us a heck of a lot about the two different memory systems, implicit versus explicit memory. Explicit memory is largely what we think about when we're discovering memories with somebody. You know, what did you remember? When did it happen? Declarative memory, somatic memory, and so on. Whereas implicit memory is very much emotional or procedural. Procedural is kind of like riding a bicycle. You know, you get on, you don't think about it, you start thinking about it, you wobble all over the place. Or that emotional reaction.